Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. How worried are American voters about a presidential election where the choice is between one candidate who's getting up there a little bit in age and another who might be convicted of crimes before Election Day? Let's get to the bottom line. With U.S. presidential elections about a year away, all signs point to a rematch between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. But along the way, a lot of stuff could happen. Congress is investigating whether Biden benefited from his family's business dealings. Is it a fishing expedition, or could it lead to his impeachment? Meanwhile, Trump bounces from one legal proceeding to another in 3 different states, and a 4th trial here in the nation's capital, which is technically not a state. And besides the personal challenges of the party's leading candidates, how about the most pressing issues facing Americans today, like violent crime or like trying to get by in this economy? To find out more about where the American people stand these days, we're talking to 2 leading pollsters, Jeff Horwitt of Hart Research, which does research for the Democratic Party, and Micah of Public Opinion Strategies, which does research for the Republican Party. Gentlemen, it's great to have you here. I always love these shows where I can get a snapshot and take the temperature of all Americans by talking to folks like yourself. Let me start with you, Mike, and ask, how thrilled are Americans with this choice of Joe Biden and Donald Trump, which I know is not solidified yet, but that's where things look right now?
Well, it's great to be on, and I would just say Americans aren't looking forward to that matchup. More or less, people are saying that that's not the kind of candidate matchup that they want. Although, that does seem to be where things are headed, and people have made up their minds about those 2 candidates fairly in a large portion, because they're so well known, and they get to compare what a presidency under Trump looks like versus what a presidency under Biden looks like. And so there's a lot that people understand about these 2 candidates, know about them, but a lot of the polling says that people aren't too excited about that matchup.
So let me ask you a question. Why is the system so stuck that only these 2 choices? What is happening in the U.S. political system that we're ending up with 2 non-optimal choices that the nation is looking at? I mean, how do your Republican conversationalists see it?
In terms of why we're stuck in this choice, one of the main reasons is because, for better or for worse, Donald Trump is the kind of the center of gravity of American politics. We asked a question in this poll about, are you voting more for Donald Trump or against Joe Biden among Trump voters? And we asked the same thing among Biden voters. We said, are you voting more for Biden or against Trump? In both instances, the plurality said, oh, no, this is way more about Trump for me than it is about Biden. So even among Biden's voters, this is a referendum on Trump. He has continued to be the center of the political conversation. And even as there's only one president at a time in America, he has kind of gotten enough of the limelight that this is foregone conclusion that we're talking about is a lot because of the coverage that he continues to get, and mostly negative coverage from January 6th, from his multiple indictments, and from being a newsworthy figure and individual that news outlets honestly want to cover because of the ratings that they get. So that's part of the problem That's part of the systematic structure here that's keeping this locked into this kind of less than optimal choice for voters.
Jeff, let me ask you the same question, but as you kind of look at the Democratic side, one of the things that's surprising to me, candidly, would love you to comment, are the polls out there that right now that said if the election were held tomorrow, Trump would get about 43% of the vote, Biden would get about 43%. There's still about 14% out there sorting it out. I am surprised by that because, I think if I honestly were wanting to run against President Trump, I'd say maybe independents are a little bit worried about the guy. Maybe these convictions matter to some Americans. It would look like a slam dunk for the Democrats. So what is going on your side of the equation and the people you're talking to?
Yeah, so Steve, the 2020 election never ended. We are not living through a normal time. This is not.
Well, Donald Trump keeps saying it never ended.
And he's the reason why. And the Republican Party is the reason why it never ended. We have not been in a situation where the losing candidate in an election refused to accept the results, led to January 6th. And that is fundamentally different than anything we've ever experienced. And so Micah's quite right. This question we've asked is something that's a really important question is, what's your vote about? And we've asked this 2 other times when there was an incumbent president, in 2004 with George W. Bush, and in 2012 with Barack Obama. Both times, majority of voters said this election, my choice, is about the incumbent president. That's not what is happening now. And that is a really important point, is that Donald Trump did not fade away after the election, which most losing candidates do. He's still front and center. That's what this is election about. That's what the 2020 election was about. A majority of Biden voters, when asked, why am I voting? It's to get Donald Trump out of office. We're still, in effect, relitigating that election, and that's what is fundamentally different.
So with Micah saying that Donald Trump, this is all about Trump, I mean, he's got a strong point there.
A very strong point, and that's what the debate tonight is going to be about Trump, even though he's not he won't be there. And so that's what fundamentally is different about this election. And I take your point about the Democratic, concerns on the Democratic side.
Well, I mean, let me just jump in. I want to show you a graphic here for a second about concerns about President Biden's age and the factors around it. We'll get in that for a minute, but we see that when NBC News poll says that when it comes to physical and mental health concerns about Joe Biden, with Biden at 74%, with Trump is 47%. They're only 3 years apart, right? One's in his high 70s, the other's in his low 80s. What's going on there, and why is age hitting one so much more significantly than the other?
Yeah. So I think, look, we have a majority of major concerns about Biden's health, and also a majority are concerned about Trump and the trials and what that will mean for him and his ability to serve as president if he were elected. The important thing about these concerns is that they're not all equal. So, yes, people are concerned about Biden's age, but if you look at people who have major concerns about him, there's still a good chunk of those voters, almost 1 in 5, who are voting for Biden for president. That's not the same for those who have major concerns about Trump and his trials, January 6th, and his involvement there. It's a fundamentally different level of concern. So, yes, concern. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not voting for Biden, because those are 2 very different issues. The question for voters is, do you want what has happened over these last 4 years with the Joe Biden and Kamala Harris administration, where it is a more competent, focused administration getting us out of COVID, or do you want to return to the chaos and division and a really messy and uneven response to COVID, which I think most Americans don't want, and that's proof in our poll.
Micah, another factor out there that's getting tossed into the soup of all of this are issues about impeachment inquiries and the efforts tied into issues of funding the government shutdown, or as an impeachment inquiry into the behavior of Joe Biden. Let's listen to this clip from Congressman Matt Gaetz. I'd love to get your thoughts.
Joe Biden deserves impeachment for converting the vice presidency into an ATM machine for virtually his entire family.
So, Micah, that's also in the mix. And what I'm trying to figure out is how Americans are hearing this. Do they think there's something there? Do they think this is a, insolvent fishing expedition? Will it have any traction politically from your point of view right now, or is it too early to tell?
I think Americans are much more concerned about what their own ATM looks like than about that kind of comment about Biden right now, because Jeff talked about the kind of contrast that Americans are making between these 2 candidates. And of course, there hasn't been a single vote cast yet. So we talked a lot about Trump, but the other contrast that they can make between these 2 candidates is what the economy looked like under President Trump compared to what it's looked like over the last few years. And that is a really important contrast. When we were doing the CNBC poll, which is a quarterly poll that I do as well with Hart, with the talented folks at Hart Research, during the Trump years, it was record after record after record of high economic confidence. People felt like things were finally, the economy was finally moving forward. COVID hits, and it got very messy, to Jeff's point. But since then, inflation has taken a real hit and a real chunk out of people's economic confidence. And now, for the last couple of years, what we've seen is record low confidence over and over and over. And we've been measuring all of these things since the Great Recession, and we're even seeing lower confidence on many measures compared to even the midst of the Great Recession. And so, talk about contrast. I think in this poll, an important contrast that people have made is for the first time, actually for the highest margin for Republicans in terms of this basic thing. Who do you trust more to take care of and handle the economy? Republicans have a 21-point advantage. It's the highest we've measured in the NBC polling going back 30 years. So we can have a conversation about contrast and these two administrations, but I think an important part of that is the economic realities people are facing.
Well, Michael, let me just drill down a little bit further with you on that. Not too long ago, Joe Biden and his team, his economic advisors, Janet Yellen, Jared Bernstein, others in the economic sphere of Biden land, came out and said, this is how great Bidenomics is. They named economics after this president. Is that a loser from your perspective, given the anxieties Americans are feeling?
Well, let's just look at what the president is promising. He's promising economic growth from the middle out and bottom up. And if you look at the data over the last 2 years, who gets crushed? Who's getting crushed? The bottom of the economic scale and the middle class. Again, in this poll, we found a 2-point margin for Democrats having an advantage, the Democratic Party having an advantage on handling and looking out for the middle class. We see record low measures of your economic satisfaction and your personal economic satisfaction. And so both of those things tell me that message is not penetrating. Yes, he has to go out and talk about this because it's a gaping hole and a weakness in his reelection bid. But the idea that Bidenomics right now is a net positive for this president is really a base play. I don't think many people outside of the core Biden voter is hearing that and believes it. Because again, he's making a promise that isn't being reflected in reality.
Right, Jeff, is Bidenomics a winning bumper sticker? And let me just add an element. The president of the United States went out and went to a strike with United Auto Workers, went to a picket line, and a lot of those the folks that are striking at United Auto Workers in this labor dispute with General Motors are out there because of their concern about electric vehicles and about renewable energy and about AI and about various things that the Biden administration has championed. So here's the president of the United States striking in some ways against the policies he brought to this economy. How is this playing with people you're talking to?
Well, it's important. If you say you're going to be the most pro-union president in history, you need to show up when the labor movement is under attack.
I know, but he helped cause some of the dynamics.
That is a part of what's going on here. But then you have to show up. He's showing up. He is delivering on what he promised, much like he's delivering on the economy. And yes,
is that giving him a net bump?
Some of these things, it will, and it's important. It's also important to remember that the term Obamacare, when the Affordable Care Act was passed, was at the beginning it was not a popular term until President Obama embraced it. He said, yeah, it's Obamacare. If I'm going to get people on health insurance and save people's lives and make a difference for people, yeah, I'm going to own that. In the same way that President Biden is doing that now with Bidenomics. And remember, that's a small part of everything he's doing on the economy. Micah's quite right on the middle class number. That is a really important number that can't be at +2 for Democrats. That must be much higher. But when you're talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, you're talking about lowering prescription drug costs for people on Medicare, and that's going to go across the board now for insulin prices because of drug companies being forced by President Biden to lower costs. And his work on trying to lower the cost for education, those things matter. And are people feeling them right now? No, not as much as they need to. But the more that message is delivered, and the more you can see the infrastructure and the impact that that's had on jobs and also people's travel times, All of those things matter, and that's part of what we're going to see over the next year. How
much is this, the tectonics and the divide between the different, wings of the Republican Party that seem to be constantly, I think, terrorizing Speaker Kevin McCarthy, something that the nation is irritated by? How much of that is playing into it, and how much of that is inside the bubble of Washington, D.C.?
For a regular voter, I think that a lot of that internal fighting is not as important as the kind of solutions that the administration needs to have on addressing crime, on addressing immigration, and getting inflation, actually doing something to get inflation lower. Jeff talked about prescription drug prices, which may be very important, but at the end of the day, what we're really struggling with is grocery prices, gas prices, and we've got an administration that's taking a very, very aggressive stance on against our own energy independence. And so when people talk about crime, immigration, energy policy, I think those are the types of conversations that Americans want to have way more than infighting in either party. And we're in the middle of a Republican primary. I mean, we're going to have a lot of dust around our party right now that the Democrats, by comparison, are not going to look like they have. But believe you me, there is a schism within the Democratic Party. Just look at our poll. 59% of Democrat primary voters want this president to be challenged in the primary. He is not strong. He does not have the obviously, as people have talked about, the kind of mental and physical capacity to encourage people to feel like he's a strong leader right now. And that's not just on the economy, that's on foreign policy and these other things that we've talked about, immigration, crime, where Republicans have, again, a record high number in terms of our ability to be trusted on those issues.
Well, let's run a clip I want Jeff to respond to as well from Hakeem Jeffrey's leader of the Democratic Party. He has some interesting thoughts on this question as well.
The extreme MAGA Republicans are focused on loading up these appropriations bills with their right-wing ideological wish list. And that is why the House is unable to function at this moment under extreme MAGA Republican leadership, and why we believe they are barreling the American people toward a government shutdown that may crash the economy and certainly will hurt everyday Americans.
So, Jeff, what Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffrey is saying, there's this big show going on over there, and that's all them. Is that giving any momentum at all to Joe Biden?
Yeah, well, that's a part of it, and Leader Jeffries is absolutely right about that. But it's bigger than that, and that's when he's talking about the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. It's not just trying to tear down government on the shutdown here, which, by the way, shutdowns and impeachment, a lot of these Republicans were not in Congress in the 90s. But if they look back, they would know that both of these, when you have impeachment without something that a lot of people think merits impeachment, people don't like that. They reject that. And President Clinton's job rating, approval ratings went way up because of that. Same with the government shutdown back in the 90s. It was a loser for Newt Gingrich, and it's going to be a loser for Speaker McCarthy. And I think he understands that. But it is a bigger issue for the Republican Party because it's not just about trying to tear down government and not fund things that we've already spent money and have to pay for. But it is this attack on people's rights, attack on democracy, rejecting election results. You have hundreds of Republicans who voted against certifying President Biden's election, and you really focus on trying to take away people's rights. And and this is on abortion, this is on voting rights, and that's where you're seeing the passion and the heat with Democrats, but also really for independents who are rejecting, and moderate Republicans who are rejecting the sort of extreme MAGA Republicanism that Leader Jeffries.
Well, let me ask you both this question, and I want to be careful how I frame it. But Joe Biden, when he ran first, he said, we're fighting for the soul of the nation. We're fighting to save democracy. Does that work with Americans today?
So Americans remember what happened on January 6th, and that has not gone away. There were people who were literally fighting against Capitol police officers in the Capitol for democracy. So democracy is, it's like it never went away. That we are still fighting for the soul of the country. And whether, again, it's voting rights, whether it's happened on January 6th, accepting just the very simple premise that someone lost and someone won an election, that's still going on. And Americans remember that. And again, in normal times, we would be having conversations more about policy. And one of the things that's striking about the NBC poll that we did is normally we don't ask democracy as a voting issue. It's like, well, that's just sort of assumed that democracy is a thing that everybody accepts. We put it on our NBC poll last year, and it was at the top of the list of voting issues. And so this is something that the American people really care about, and is a real important priority.
Micah, do you agree?
Look, I think we've got a extreme partisanship on both sides, and here's what the data says, not my own opinion. The data says that Republicans, when they think about the Democrat agenda, 80% of Republicans say that agenda, the Democratic Party's agenda, is so terrible that it will destroy America as we know it. Now, here's the flip side of that. 80% of Democrats feel the exact same way about Republicans. And so we have these loggerheads, and we have these extreme positions about the other party that is.
Well, let me just interrupt and ask you a point. You know, Donald Trump is out there on Donald Trump's side and saying he's going to go after the Bidens, who he sees as corrupt, and he's going to obliterate the deep state, which is killing America. Do those messages resonate? I mean, it's along the lines of what you're saying.
Well, here's what the other data says from this poll, which is when we ask who do you trust more to protect the Constitution, protect your rights, that is a split even across the country. And so that's the other point I wanted to bring up is, I think Jeff's point about January 6th and nobody, people haven't forgotten. That does not just divide in one direction. And so there are very, 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 very strong feelings about the other party on each side of the divide here. And we have to recognize that, this doesn't just split one way or the other. It's not Donald Trump against the rest of the world. Lots of Americans, half of Americans, feel the exact same about the Democratic Party and about Joe Biden. So both these candidates are carrying in all of this baggage, corruption, concerns about their personal ethics, and also, by the way, they have about equal feelings toward them in terms of positive, negative about them personally.
Well, wise comments from you both, surveyors of American public opinion, Jeff Horwitt of Hart Research and Micah Roberts of Public Opinion Strategies. Thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
So what's the bottom line? Have you ever had that feeling that you're watching a train wreck in really slow motion? That's how I feel as America boldly marches towards its next presidential election. It's a sad indictment of both parties when they simply can't produce any viable candidates other than the guys from last time. So we see the Republicans and the Democrats limping along. They're exhausted, they're stretched in opposite directions, and not providing a great lesson about democracy to young people in the way they are run. Maybe we're going back to a time in American history when the parties broke apart and new parties were born. Maybe it's time that the corruption and the stagnancy of the two parties collapses and new options emerge. Of course, that's not likely to happen this time around, but it may be coming sooner than you think. And that's the bottom line.